What's one dream you've quietly decided is impossible for you? Not because somebody told you it's impossible, but maybe because somewhere along the way, your own mind, without realizing it, quietly closed the door of possibility. I think one of the biggest limitations we experience isn't a lack of talent um, or ability. I think it's actually a mind that stopped asking questions. Now, most people, I think, when you say an open mind, I think often they think you mean being open to other people's opinions. And that's not what I mean. I think an open mind is being open to possibilities that your intellect has already ruled out for seemingly logical reasons. And the moment we label something impossible, our mind stops searching altogether, which is, I suppose, one of the key points that I'm talking about here in this podcast today. So some examples of that could be, I'd love to start a business. I'd love to sell a business. I'd love to grow my business. I'd love to change my business direction. I'd love to change career. I'd love to repair a key relationship. I'd love to get fit again. But notice what happens, for some things, not everything, but for some things, your mind will say, well, that's not going to happen. Conversation over. Now, a few years ago, I was in London. I suppose, working on my own development. I was at a particular 3-day kind of intensive workshop, and it was around the inner game. And there was a very interesting exercise with the host where at the beginning on the first day, they asked everybody, look, share something that you think is impossible, but if it happened, you'd love it to happen, but you genuinely think it's impossible. And everybody went around the room. There was about 7 of us in this particular workshop. When it came to me, I'd identified my impossible. My impossible was I was in the middle of writing a book, and I'd love for that book to become a bestseller. And as far as I was concerned, that was genuinely impossible. Now, what was interesting was once everybody had shared their impossible goal or vision, the host then, picked the first person and said, okay, look, for the next few minutes, you can't speak. We're just going to talk about your impossible. And so everybody else talked about their impossible. What was really interesting as we went around the room was that nobody else thought your goal or vision was impossible. They all actually either had done it, knew somebody had done it, or could see ways that it could happen, which was interesting. And the exact same thing happened to me. Now, it wasn't what happened was I realized, first of all, it opened my mind. I didn't even realize my mind was closed. Not really. I thought, look, it just seems logical that it wouldn't be possible right now. But I came out of that particular workshop thinking, well, what if? Like, what if? And a couple of years later, I'd finished my book. And, we were in the middle of we were leading in the months leading up to a launch. I remember the person asked me who was helping me with the marketing and the branding and the launch itself, said, well, what's the goal? And I thought, well, I was talking about just want to get it out there. And then I remember the workshop and it caught my mind kind of going, basically chickening out of going for something impossible. So I quietly went off by myself to hang on a second here. What if it was possible to have a best-selling book? Like, do I even know how does it work? So I went down to my local bookshop in Wicklow in Ireland, a place called Bridge Street Books. It's my favorite bookshop. Great family that runs the business. And I just spoke to the owner, Hilary, and I said, listen, how are book sales measured? And she told me about this organization called ISBN. And she explained to me how things were measured, and I asked more questions. And then I went off and I did more research, and I kept asking questions and kept digging in. And then I realized one day I saw a pathway to getting a bestseller. It became very clear to me as to what I needed to do. It was going to require effort and work and time, of course, but I saw a pathway because my mind was open to asking questions. It was curious. Now, again, I just want to emphasize as well, go back to the workshop. As it turned out, the pathway to the bestseller was nothing anybody suggested in that workshop in London. Okay, so the workshop didn't solve the problem. What the workshop did, which was the most important variable, was it reopened my mind that I didn't realize was closed. Now, a kind of a similar maybe analogy to make the point is a GPS system. When you don't enter a destination, the GPS doesn't calculate a route. It's not because there isn't one. It's just because you haven't asked it for one or set a destination. And what I've realized is that our minds work very similarly. Once we conclude that's impossible, we stop calculating a route. It just never will appear. And it's not because it doesn't exist. It's because your search has ended. And that, to me, is a game-changing insight. Once you close off the what-if possibility question, your mind just doesn't even look for an answer. But if it's open, it's always scanning. It's always scanning for an opportunity or a way, a pathway. So, as usual, here are some questions for you to consider. First of all, be honest with yourself. Take some time out over the next few days and make some time to consider these questions. Like, where in your life have you quietly decided, well, that isn't possible for me? My bet is there has to be something if you're human. The second question then is, okay, well, what question have you stopped asking? And it might be as simple as, okay, that seems impossible, but what if it was possible? And then the third element I'm saying is, well, what if you replace that certainty that you have that it isn't possible with curiosity about, well, what if maybe it is possible? Maybe I can just open my mind and start exploring in that direction. If you were more curious, what would you become more curious about this week or this month or this year? Like, what if? And I'll finish with a simple but powerful practice. Maybe write this down somewhere and look at it a few times this week. Write down the sentence, that'll never happen, and replace it with, I wonder what would have to happen. So that'll never happen. And I wonder what would have to happen for that to happen. Just one question, that's all. You don't have to believe anything. You don't have to force optimism or positive thinking here. That's not what I'm talking about. You just simply reopen the search ability in the powerful asset, your most powerful asset, your mind. And again, going back to that workshop in London, again, it just, for me, the most valuable thing that it did was, looking back, was it interrupted the certainty of my mind. This kind of unconscious certainty that I had that something wasn't possible. And so I just wasn't allowing myself to look in that direction. And like, certainty isn't always confidence. Sometimes I think certainty is just a conclusion that we've reached too early. And maybe one of the most powerful questions that we can ever ask ourselves isn't, can I do it? It's, what if I'm wrong about what's possible? As I heard a wise person say many years ago, our job isn't to decide what's possible. Our job really as humans is to go after the impossible and then let reality decide what is possible. That's a very different proposition. That's it for this week. Ciao for now.